Hello everyone. Assalamualaikum. Okay, so hari ni kita akan start with chapter 7, Introduction to Programming. So this is the last chapter in your syllabus for this semester. Okay, this is your learning outcome, and in this topic we're going to discuss about what is programming language, low level and high level language, and also we're going to talk about translator, and lastly paradigm of programming language. Okay, so I know this term might sound new to you, but don't freak out. We're going to discuss this term one by one. Now, let's discuss about programming. So, you mesti selalu dengar programming. But what is actually programming? So, programming is a series of instructions that direct a computer to perform tasks. Confused? Okay, tak apa. Now, let's see the example. Okay, sekarang ni, okay, I know you're gonna freak out. For those yang tak pernah nampak, you might be like, oh, what the hell is this? Okay, tak apa. Slow. So, this is an example of Java code. So, programming language dia Java. So, saya tak akan terang satu-satu. So, now let's just focus on yang ada highlight kuning tu. So, highlight kuning tu actually is a instruction to the computer where it said system out print line hello world. So, maksudnya kat sini, awak sedang tulis kod Java yang memberi arahan kepada Java tu untuk printkan output hello world. Okay, so this is example of programming because now here you are giving instruction, right? Tadi saya cakap pasal Java tu programming language. Okay, tapi apa sebenarnya programming language? So, programming language is a set of words, abbreviations and symbols that enable a programmer to communicate instruction to a computer. Okay, so basically programming language ni lebih kurang lah macam language kita human. Ada bahasa Melayu, ada bahasa Inggeris, and we have Korean, Mandarin and banyak lagi lah. So different language, dia ada different symbol, different cara nak represent the language itself kan. Kalau Korean kita ada symbol-symbol yang might hard for you to read, but in Malay we're using alphabets yang A to Z lah kan. Okay, so sama lah macam programming language. Dalam programming language dia ada simbol-simbol dia masing-masing, dia ada words dia masing-masing, so dia ada set of rules dia masing-masing. Okay, now let's see the type of programming language. So, programming language have two types. One is low-level language and second one is high-level language. So, low-level language divided into two, machine language and also assembly language. And for high-level language, we have examples like C, C++, and others lah. Okay, now let's talk about machine language. So, machine language use the natural language of a computer. Natural language maksudnya language that computer can understand. In other words, it's using numerical language to be written. But because it uses a numerical language, it's very difficult for programmer to write, kan? Awak nak tulis nama awak dalam binary, panjanglah jadinya. Akan jadi sangat confusing kan? Okay. Tapi kebaikannya machine language ni is because it's used natural language, it is ready for immediate executions because the instructions can be understood by the computer. But, however, there are disadvantages of using this language. These languages are extremely cryptic and difficult to learn and very lengthy. Besides that, it's also machine dependent. Machine dependent ni maksudnya instruction or application tu only run by a specific processor. Now, let's move on to assembly language. So, assembly language consists of English-like abbreviations. So, maksudnya dia lebih clearer to humans to read. But, it need to be translated to machine language. Kalau tak, komputer tak faham lah. Okay, so advantage-nya adalah instructions are easier to learn by a human or programmer compared to machine language because now it's using English abbreviations, right? Okay, but the disadvantages is incomprehensible to computers until translated to machine language. Maksudnya, komputer tak boleh faham sampailah dia ditranslatekan kepada machine language. And also, programs are quite lengthy lah because it's not 100% in English. Okay, so masih menggunakan simbol-simbol lain. So, masih dikira agak panjang lah. And it's also machine dependent. Okay, sekarang ni tengok example assembly and machine language. So, assembly language tu, okay, you nampak kan ada top, board, ST, lepas tu ada bawah-bawah sikit tu ada MUL, so ada bawah sikit lagi ada JMP. So, sebenarnya dia adalah short form to multiply, jump dan banyak lagi lah dia punya meaning dia. Okay. Sebelah tu adalah machine language. So it consists of zeros and one. So it's very lengthy and confusing, right? Compared to the assembly language. But assembly language is also quite lengthy at this point. Not really readable, but slightly better than machine language. Okay, now let's move on to high level language. So high level language are more natural language for humans and instructions are now written using a series of English-like words. And because of that, it's easier to learn than machine or assembly language. But we need a translator because we need to convert the language into a machine code so that a computer can understand it. Okay, example of high-level language are C, C++, Java, SQL, and a lot more lah. Okay, now you're seeing an example of Java code for Hello World. So compared to assembly and machine language, now it's easier to be read, right? Because it's using more English words. Although at this point, you might be confused with some of the words lah. Okay, tak apa. We won't be discussing what each words means at this point. Okay, tadi saya mention about translator, right? Because high-level language need a translator to make the computer understand the language, right? Okay, now let's look further into translator, or we call it as programming language processor. Okay, so what is translator? Translator is a computer program that performs the translation of a program written in a programming language into another computer language. So normally here we are referring for it to translate high-level language into machine code. Panjangnya, right? Panjangnya definition. Okay, saya simplify kan. So, translator ni sebagaimana dia punya nama tu, itulah maksudnya. Maksudnya kita nak translate. Translator ni berfungsi sebagai penterjemah. Penterjemah high level language to a machine code supaya computer can understand. Kan, computer tak boleh understand English, but it can understand machine code. So, what we need is a translator in between that so that we can convert our high level language into a machine code for our computer to understand. And now we're looking at the types of translator. So there are three types, which is compiler, interpreter, and assembler. Okay, as for assemblers, the function is to convert assembly language to machine code. So it's very simple lah. Okay, as for interpreter and compiler, okay, dengar betul-betul. Okay, so interpreter, function dia beza dia dengan compiler adalah interpreter it converts one statement or instruction at a time. Whereas the compiler, it's convert the entire instruction into machine code at once. So, cara dan gaya kedua-dua translator ni adalah berbeza lah. So, interpreter, no object code is generated, hence are memory efficient. But for compiler, it generates object code which requires more memory. So, object code ni adalah something yang dihasilkan oleh compiler lah. Okay, at this point, it's very hard for you to see what object code is, but after this, we're going to play a video Hopefully daripada video tu saya boleh terangkan dengan lebih lanjut. Okay, tak apa, kita teruskan to the next point. So, interpreter, because it converts one statement one by one, so dia akan continue translating the program until the first error is met, in which case it stop. Hence, locating error is easy. So, sebab dia convert satu-satu, kalau ada error, dia akan berhenti. So, kita tahu error tu dekat mana. But as for compiler, it generates the error message only after converting the whole program. So, locating of error is hard. Okay, programming language for interpreter are like Python, Ruby, whereas for compilers we have C++ or C. Okay, so untuk awak lebih faham lagi, I'm gonna play you a video. So hopefully from this video, it's gonna help you to understand better about interpreter and compiler. Okay, let's watch it.
When you land in the world of computers with their strange, convoluted machine language, it's a bit like landing on another planet whose inhabitants speak an equally strange, convoluted alien language. Getting a mechanic on planet Gobbledygook to repair your spaceship would present the same sort of problem that you have when you want to get a computer to do something. Everything you say has to be translated. And you have a choice between two different sorts of translator. One of them is called an interpreter, and the other is called a compiler. Let's suppose that you've previously written out your list of instructions for the repair of your spaceship. And suppose that you choose the interpreter to do the translating. He reads your first instruction, open lid of rocket engine, translates this into gobbledygook, and immediately passes it on to the mechanic, who executes the instruction. Then the interpreter reads your second instruction, remove spark plug, translates this into gobbledygook, and passes it on to the mechanic, who executes it. And so on and so forth. Now, notice how the interpreter works. He stays with you all the time, and he translates each of your instructions immediately, one by one. This is a rather slow process, because the mechanic has to wait while each instruction is being translated. But, on the other hand, it does give you a chance to correct your mistakes as you go along. If the mechanic removes the wrong spark plug, for instance, you'll see this happen right away, and you'll be able to change your instruction accordingly. Compare this with the way the second sort of translator, the compiler, goes about his work. He takes your complete list of instructions and, without further ado, translates the whole lot straight into gobbledygook. He then hands them back to you.
Okay, let's stop for a while. So, nampak tak the paper yang compiler hand back to the man? So, that paper is actually that paper is actually a representations of your object code. So object code is something that the compiler produce.
And goes away, leaving you all on your own. All this has taken some time, but from now on, things will go very fast. You hand the complete list of gobbledygook to the mechanic, and he executes them all in one go. Bang, bang, bang. There's no waiting about this time. But there's one disadvantage to this, of course. If there was a mistake in your instructions, it's too late now. This analogy comes very close to the way the interpreter and compiler translator programs actually work with computers. An interpreter runs slowly, starts right away, and lets you see how things are going. Whereas a compiler takes extra preparation time before your program can run, but then lets it run very quickly and efficiently. To help you remember the difference between an interpreter and a compiler, look at the words themselves. Inter means between. The interpreter is always between your program and the computer, and it translates line by line. To compile, on the other hand, means to pile together. A compiler piles together your entire program and translates the whole thing all at once. Which one you use on planet Gobbledygook is entirely up to you.
Okay, now let's move on to programming language paradigm. Apa kau bondonya ni? Okay. Let's take a look at what is programming language paradigm. Okay, so kita tengok dulu the word paradigm tu. Okay, macam kenal tapi siapakah dia? Okay, so paradigm actually means a typical example of or pattern of something ataupun a style, a concept. So when we talk about paradigm, we actually referring to the pattern, concept, style. So kalau dalam konteks programming, kita mungkin akan bercakap pasal variables, functions, objects or steps that consist of process. Okay, masih tak faham. Okay, tak apa. Kita teruskan. Okay, so overall, programming language paradigm, we refer to a style of computer programming ataupun a general framework for designing and organizing programs. Okay, saya bagi contoh. Katakanlah style berpakaian. So, kita macam-macam ada style berpakaian kan? Ada yang berpakaian dengan ayu, ada yang berpakaian dengan konsep cool. Okay, semua orang ada gaya dia masing-masing kan? So, macam itulah programming language. Cuma kita tak adalah katakan, oh, cool, cantik, tak cantik itu dari segi konsep berpakaian. Kalau dari segi programming language, adalah benda lain yang kita akan cakapkan. So, itulah yang kita nak belajar tu. Konsep ataupun gaya programming language. Gitulah secara ringkasnya. Programming language paradigm ni dia ada dua kategori, which is imperative and declarative. So each category tu dia ada types je lah. As for the imperative, you'll see the types is procedural, structures, object-oriented programming. Whereas for the declarative, it's more into logic and functional types. Okay, so imperative programming ni apa benda dia? Okay, imperative programming ni is a program that tells you how to do the computer. For example, in C programming, the execution starts after the void main method, followed sequentially by other statements and ends after the last statement in that method. Okay. Some of you might be confused with the examples. Okay, tak apa. Kita akan bagi example lain nanti, tak apa. Okay, so now imperative programming, you just focus on how to do. Okay, so examples of imperative programming are like C, C++, Java, and Fortran, dan banyak lagi lah. Okay, as for the declarative programming, it is a style of programming that expresses the logic of a computations without control flow or sequences of instruction. Maksudnya, program tu is focus more on describing what it should do. Okay, kalau imperative tadi, how it should be done, right? Kalau declarative, what it should do. Okay, so programs are written based on the logic of a computations without control flow or sequence of commands. So, examples are like SQL, Prolog, HTML, dan banyak lagi lah. Okay, I know the explanation was a bit confusing because there are a lot of terms that you've never heard before. Okay, because of that, let's imagine this situation. Okay, saya nak explain based on story, based on situation lah. Imagine you're going to a restaurant. Okay, kalau pergi seorang bosan kan? Okay, tak apa. Kita pergi berdua. Okay, so imagine you're going to a restaurant with your boyfriend or with your girlfriend. So, dia ada, bila you pergi restoran, dia ada dua possible situation. Okay, first is imperative approach. Okay, now saya nak bagi example untuk imperative. Okay, so imperative approach tadi is how kan? How you gonna do something, right? So, imperative approach is, in this situation, example-nya adalah, I see that table located over at the back is empty. So, my boyfriend or my girlfriend and I are going to walk over there and sit down at that table. Sit down at the chair lah. Jangan sit down at the table. Okay? Okay. excited sangat lah. Hai, sampai nak duduk atas table. Okay, tak apa. Second situation. So, second situation, saya nak bagi examples of declarative approach. So, imperative approach is more about how, but declarative approach is more about what. So, in declarative approach, you don't go and tell what you're going to do. Instead, you will just give instruction of what you want to do. So, in this situation, example for declarative approach is table for two please. Okay. You bagi tahu je kan. You bagi tahu you nak apa. You nak table for two. Okay, you tak bagi tahu macam mana. So that is the difference between imperative approach and declarative approach. Okay, so the next slide shows you another simple metaphor that explains about imperative and declarative. So this one and you can read. If you're still confused, you can read this one. I'm not gonna explain this. Now let's see declarative example. So ini adalah SQL. I think I've showed you in the lab before in database kan. You use SQL walaupun you tak betul-betul faham sangat, but you've seen this before. Okay, so in SQL, so it's telling you what to do. So dia declarative kan. So declarative is about what. So kalau you tengok example ni, select something from user where this. So you're telling, okay, get something from the table user where the condition is the country have to be Mexico. So sebenarnya in this line of instruction telling the computer what to do, which is very different compared to imperative in Java, for example. So here's the Java code examples. Okay, siapa yang tak pernah nampak programming tu, don't freak out. I'm gonna explain to you one by one. Okay, yang the first two line ni, okay, tak apa, kita skip that one. Okay, yang int num1 equal to 10, num2 equal to 20, num3 equal to 7. So this line is basically telling you there are three numbers, number 10, number 20, and number 7. Okay, moving on to the next line. So this part of the code, it's telling the computer bahawasanya sekiranya if number 1 is more than or equal to number 2 dan juga number 1 is more than or equal to number 3, the system will print number 1 is the largest, or else number 2 might be the largest, or else number 3 might be the largest. Okay, so unlike the SQL, Java is pretty much telling the computer how to find the largest numbers instead of just giving instruction find the largest numbers. Tak, dia tak macam tu. This is imperative. Java is imperative. So it's telling the system, it's telling the computer how to find the largest number. So yang you nampak ni, kalau number 1 lebih ataupun sama dengan number 2 dan number 3, maksudnya number 1 largest. Kalau tak, check pula number 2. Mungkin number 2 yang largest. Kalau tak, number 3 lah yang paling largest. Okay, so basically itulah apa contoh ni cakap. Now let's go back to this slide. So tadi I've already mentioned imperative and declarative, the other types there. So imperative, the types is procedural, structures, and also object-oriented programming. So what does it mean by this is, procedural means that the programming language divides the task of a program is supposed to perform into smaller subtasks. Okay, so macam tadilah ibaratnya Java tu dia nak cari largest number kan. So dia buat satu-satu dulu. Dia tengok sama ada number 1 is the largest ke, number 2 is the largest ke, number 3 is the largest. Okay, and then the other structured. So structures mean that they have a specific control structure, which is sequence, selection, and iteration. So ibarat macam kita punya tulang ada structure kan. Okay. Macam itulah programming language. So ni adalah jenis-jenis sequence, selection, and iterations. The one that you saw just now, which is the Java code to find the largest number tu, dia ada selection contoh dia. If yang ada if tu, that one is selection. So, okay, itu example dia lah. Okay, you're gonna see this a lot more when you're doing the coding next semester. Okay, so another thing is OOP. Apa benda ni? Object-oriented programming. So, object-oriented programming means it uses object to design programs. So, object is a component of a program that knows how to perform an actions and how to interact with other elements of the programs. So, examples dia adalah Java lah. So, Java memang object-oriented programming. It's very hard for me to show you what is object is without you understanding the Java. But then at this point, just imagine yang macam dalam hidup kita ada banyak benda-benda objek di sekeliling kan. So Java pun dia ada konsep yang sama lah. There's objects used in the programming language. Okay. Seterusnya kita ada declarative. So declarative dia ada dua, logic and functional. Sorry dah tak betul lah. Okay. So as for logic, it uses the logic computations without describing its control flow, and functional, it design of the concept of mathematical functions. So macam tadi SQL tu examples of logic used in the programming language lah. Okay, as for the functional, okay, kita akan tengok contoh yang seterusnya. Ini adalah contoh code Python. If I'm not mistaken, this is Python. Okay, so nampak tak dia ada banyak macam filter, lambda. So actually this kind of things you saw a lot in mathematicals. Expression. Aduh. Okay, so ini adalah contoh dan rupa functional lah. Okay, so yeah, that's all. I think that's all for our lecture today. So, yep. Any question you can just ask me later on. But for now, yes, that is the end of our lesson. Okay. Thank you everyone. So I'll see you next time. Bye bye.